During my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law quietly laughed. Now that he's gone, I control the house, and I'm sending the old lady to a nursing home. I smiled, and the following week, I sold the house and booked a cruise. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The funeral home was suffocating with the scent of lilies and grief. I stood beside Scott's casket, my hand resting on its polished wood, trying to comprehend that my husband of 45 years was truly gone. The stroke had been sudden, merciless. One moment he was laughing over breakfast, the next, gone forever. Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry for your loss. Another face, another hand squeezing mine, another well-meaning platitude that somehow failed to reach the hollow place inside my chest. At 70, I thought I understood loss. I'd buried my parents, a sister, dear friends. But losing Scott felt like losing gravity itself. Everything familiar now seemed strange and unstable. Mom, you should sit down. Stephen, my only son, appeared at my elbow, guiding me to a nearby chair. His face was a mask of appropriate grief, but something was missing in his eyes. The genuine devastation I felt seemed absent in him. I'm fine standing, I said, but aloud, myself to be seated anyway. In truth, my legs were betraying me, much like my heart was betraying what I'd just overheard. 30 minutes earlier, I'd stepped into the hallway for a moment of solitude when I heard them, Stephen and Addison, speaking, in hushed tones around the corner. How long do you think we need to wait? Addison had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For what? Stephen sounded distracted. Before we suggest she move somewhere more appropriate. That house is way too big for her alone. It's practically falling apart anyway. Addison's voice had a practical edge that made my skin crawl. Stephen sighed. I don't know. A month? 2? Then Addison laughed, actually laughed, at my husband's funeral. Well, now that he's gone, we can finally renovate that outdated kitchen. And I know the perfect care facility for her. I'd frozen, unable to move, to breathe. Just be gentle when you bring it up, Stephen warned. Mom's attached to that house. Of course, Addison replied. But I could hear the dismissal in her tone. I'll handle the old lady. Once she's settled in a home, we can really make that place shine. I'd slipped back into the main room before they could discover me, my heart thundering against my ribs. The betrayal burned like acid in my throat. Now, sitting here with mourners flowing around me like a river around a stone, I watched Addison approach, her face arranged in a perfect mask of sympathy. She knelt before me, taking my hands in hers. Carolyn, is there anything you need? Anything at all? Her eyes, usually sharp with judgment, now softened with practiced concern. I looked at this woman, my son's wife of 15 years, and wondered how I'd missed the calculation behind her kindness. All these years, had she always been waiting for this moment? For Scott to die so she could sweep in and claim our home, our memories, while discarding me like yesterday's newspaper? I'm just tired, I managed. Of course you are, poor thing. Her hand patted mine. Don't worry about a thing. Stephen and I will take care of everything. I bet you will, I thought, but smiled weakly instead. The house Addison so eagerly coveted had been our life's work. Scott and I had purchased it as a young couple, when the neighborhood was still developing. We'd painted every room ourselves, planted the garden together, raised our son within its walls. Scott had built the back deck with his own hands, cursing splinters in summer heat. Every corner held a piece of our history. And they wanted to renovate the kitchen. As guests filed past with solemn faces and empty words, I felt something shift inside me. The crushing grief remained, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a slow-burning anger that straightened my spine. That night, after the last casserole-bearing neighbor had departed, I sat alone in Scott's study. his reading glasses still, rested on the desk where he'd left them. His favorite sweater hung over the chair. For a moment, the weight of his absence threatened to pull me under. Then my eyes fell on a framed photo of us on our 40th anniversary. Scott's arm around me, both of us laughing on the deck of a cruise ship. Our one big splurge? He'd promised we'd do another for our 50th. "What would you do, Scott?" I whispered to the empty room. A memory surfaced, clear as yesterday. Scott, facing down a contractor who'd tried to cheat us years ago. "Never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness, Carolyn," he'd said afterward. "Sometimes you have to show your teeth." I ran my fingers over the cruise ship photo, an idea forming. Addison thought I was just a helpless old woman. Stephen seemed to have forgotten whose son he was. They expected me to crumble, to be led quietly away while they claimed what Scott and I had built. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I picked up the phone and dialed my old friend Margaret, who'd retired from real estate just last year. "Maggie, it's Carolyn. I know it's late, but I need your help with something important." By the time I hung up, I was smiling through my tears. They wanted my house? Let them try. 3 days after we laid Scott to rest, I found myself sitting across from Ted Holloway, our family attorney for the past 30 years. His office hadn't changed much. Same leather chairs, same discreet box of tissues for grieving clients, same gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "First, Carolyn, let me say, again how sorry I am about Scott," Ted said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine sympathy. "He was a good man." "The best," I agreed, my throat tightening. Ted nodded, then shifted into the professional tone I needed right now. "I've brought Scott's will, as you requested. It's straightforward, as you know. Scott left everything to you, the house, investments, insurance policies, everything. I'd known this, of course. Scott and I had no secrets from each other. But hearing it confirmed brought unexpected relief. "Is there anything specific you're concerned about?" Ted asked, studying my face. I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "Stephen and Addison. I overheard them at the funeral. They're planning to move me into an assisted living facility. Soon." Ted's eyebrows shot up. "Against your wishes?" "They haven't asked my wishes," I said, bitterness seeping into my voice. "Addison called me the old lady. They're already planning renovations. To my kitchen." Ted's face darkened. "They have no legal right to make such decisions for you, Carolyn. The house is yours, free and clear." "I know that, but I also know how these things go." I leaned forward. "They'll start small. Suggestions about how the house is too much work. Concerns about me living alone. They'll bring brochures, arrange visits to facilities. They'll wear me down until I give in." "And you don't want that?" "No." My voice strengthened. "I'm perfectly capable of living independently. I don't need or want their help." Ted nodded, then glanced at the door to ensure it was closed. "What exactly are you planning, Carolyn?" I straightened my shoulders. "I want to sell the house. Quickly, discreetly, and without Stephen and Addison knowing until it's done." Ted didn't look surprised. "And then?" "I'll buy something smaller, something manageable but mine. And I'll take that cruise Scott and I always planned for our 50th. The words came more easily now that I'd said them aloud. Ted smiled slightly. "Sounds like you've given this some thought." "I've had nothing but time to think these past few days." He pulled out a legal pad. "We'll need to move fast. The market's good right now. Houses in your neighborhood are selling quickly. I can recommend a few discreet realtors. I've already called Margaret Wilson. She's coming out of retirement for this." Ted chuckled. "Of course you have. Scott always said you were 3 steps ahead of everyone else." The mention of Scott brought a fresh wave of grief, but alongside it, determination. I would not let Addison and Stephen erase him from our home, turning his workshop into a home gym, or replacing the garden he'd tenderly maintained with whatever trendy landscaping Addison fancied this year. "There's something else," I said, pulling a small notebook from my purse. "I need your advice on documenting their behavior." For the next hour, Ted and I outlined my strategy. I would play the role they expected, the grieving widow, slightly confused, gradually accepting their help. Meanwhile, I would document every conversation, every suggestion about care facilities, every remark about the house. Not for legal purposes, but for my own peace of mind. When the moment came to reveal what I'd done, I wanted clarity about why. As I left Ted's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. "Coming by tonight with dinner. Addison found some brochures she thinks you should look at. Already starting," I thought. Right on schedule. That evening, I answered the door in my bathrobe, hair uncombed, eyes deliberately puffy. The perfect picture of a woman barely holding herself together. "Mom," Stephen said, embracing me awkwardly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said, letting my voice quaver slightly. Addison swept past us, heading straight for the kitchen with a bag of takeout. "The place is a mess, Carolyn," she called over her shoulder. "We should hire someone to help you keep things tidy." The house was spotless. I'd been cleaning compulsively to keep my mind occupied, but I just nodded weakly. "Perhaps you're right." During dinner, they exchanged meaningful glances before Addison pulled a glossy brochure from her purse. "We found this wonderful community, Carolyn. It's for active seniors like yourself. They have social events, transportation services, even a swimming pool." I took the brochure with trembling hands, not from emotion, but from restraining myself from throwing it back in her face. "Sunset Gardens?" I read aloud. "It's more like a resort than a retirement home," Addison continued brightly. "And they have different levels of care, so if you ever need more assistance." "They handle everything," Stephen added. "Meals, housekeeping, medical needs. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big place anymore." I nodded slowly, allowing tears to well in my eyes. It's just this house. So many memories. Addison patted my hand. "Of course. But Scott wouldn't want you, struggling here alone." "Don't you dare speak for him," I thought, but said, "You're probably right. I just need time." "Of course," Stephen said quickly. "No rush. Just something to think about." As they cleared the dinner plates, I heard Addison whisper, "See? She's coming around already." After they left, I took the brochure to Scott's study and added it to a new folder labeled Evidence. Then I called Margaret. "How soon can we list the house?" I asked without preamble. "I can have a photographer here tomorrow. We'll list by the weekend," she replied. "Are you sure about this, Carolyn?" I looked around at the home Scott and I had built together. Yes, it held memories, but those memories lived in my heart, not these walls. "Absolutely sure," I said. "And Margaret? Not a word to Stephen or Addison." "My lips are sealed," she promised. "Now tell me what you're looking for in your new place." As I described my requirements, single level, manageable yard, good security, I felt lighter than I had since Scott's death. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to loss. I was taking control of what remained, my life, my future, my dignity. Let them think I was a helpless old woman. Their underestimation would be my greatest advantage. 2 weeks passed in a blur of calculated decisions and secret meetings. I mastered the art of appearing fragile while moving mountains behind the scenes. When Stephen or Addison dropped by, unannounced, which happened with increasing frequency, I'd be sitting with a photo album, dabbing at my eyes, or staring vacantly out the window. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told them during one such visit, my voice deliberately faint. "Maybe Sunset Gardens would be easier." The triumph that flashed across Addison's face was almost worth the indignity of the charade. "We could go tour it this weekend," she suggested immediately, barely containing her excitement. Maybe next week. I demurred. I'm still sorting through some of Scott's things. Meanwhile, Margaret had worked miracles. 3 serious buyers had already toured the house while I conveniently visited old friends. The for sale sign remained in Margaret's trunk, never to touch my lawn. Everything happened through private showings and whispered negotiations. The Hendersons have made an offer, Margaret announced one Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen with a contract in hand. Full asking price, cash deal, 30-day closing. They're a lovely young couple with 2 small children. I felt a pang, imagining new little feet running down the hallways where Stephen had once played. But it was right. This house deserved a family, not Addison's cold renovations. They want to keep the garden, Margaret added gently, knowing this would matter. To me. The husband said Scott's rose bushes were what sold him on the place. Tears sprang to my eyes, real ones this time. Scott would like that. I signed the papers that afternoon. Margaret squeezed my hand as I returned the pen. Scott would be proud of you, Carolyn. That same day, I made an offer on a perfect little cottage in Oak Ridge, a charming neighborhood 20 minutes away. 2 bedrooms, a sunroom for my plants, and a small, manageable garden. Most importantly, it had a security system and a community patrol. I wasn't naive about Addison's potential reaction. My final act was the most indulgent, booking a 3-week Mediterranean cruise, departing just after closing. First-class cabin, balcony suite, all the excursions Scott and I had dreamed about. The cost made me wince, but Ted had gone through our finances in detail. I could afford it. Mom, we've scheduled a tour at Sunset Gardens for Saturday, Stephen announced by phone on Wednesday. The director is making special time for us. That's wonderful, dear, I said, infusing my voice with resignation. I suppose it's time. By Friday, everything was in place. The house sale would close in 28 days. My cottage purchase was proceeding smoothly. My cruise was confirmed. I'd arranged for the movers to come the day after closing. All that remained was to spring the trap. I invited Stephen and Addison for Saturday brunch, suggesting we could go to Sunset Gardens afterward. Addison, practically salivating at her victory, offered to bring pastries from that expensive bakery downtown. Saturday morning, I dressed with particular care. Not my usual comfortable slacks and blouse, but a stylish dress I'd purchased just for this occasion. I applied makeup, styled my hair, and even put on the pearl necklace Scott had given me for our 40th anniversary. I didn't look like a woman, ready for a retirement home. I looked like a woman ready for a new chapter. The doorbell rang precisely at 10. Addison bustled in first, balancing a pink bakery box. "Wow, Mom, you look nice," Stephen said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Thank you, dear. I felt like making an effort today." Addison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, isn't that lovely? Though, you might want to change before the tour. Something more comfortable." "Oh, I think this will do fine," I replied with a smile. "Shall we have coffee?" We settled at the dining room table, the one where our family had shared thousands of meals. Addison immediately launched into a detailed description of Sunset Gardens' amenities. "The activities director organizes bridge tournaments every Thursday," she gushed. "And they have a van that takes residents shopping twice a week. You won't have to drive at all." "I see," I said, pouring coffee. "And I suppose you've already discussed the financial arrangements?" Stephen shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we thought. That is, the house would more than cover the costs." "The house," I repeated, setting down the coffee pot. "You mean my house?" "Well, yes," Addison said, her tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. "Once you sell it—" "I've already sold it," I interrupted, my voice calm and clear. The silence that followed was absolute. Stephen's coffee cup hung suspended halfway to his lips. Addison's face froze in an expression of utter disbelief. "You." "What?" Stephen finally managed. I sold the house, I repeated, pulling the closing documents from a folder beside me. The sale closes in 27 days. The new owners are a lovely young couple with 2 children. Addison's face flushed deep red. You can't be serious. You can't just, without consulting us. Without consulting you about my house? I raised an eyebrow. The house that's solely in my name? The house you've been planning to renovate since before Scott was cold in his grave? Stephen paled. Mom, what are you talking about? Oh, I think you know, I said, turning to him. I heard you both at the funeral, plotting to put the old lady in a home and take over the house. Stephen's eyes darted to Addison, who was now gripping her coffee cup so tightly I feared it might shatter. Mom, you misunderstood, Stephen began. Did I? I reached for a second folder and withdrew, my small notebook. April 12th, Addison suggested I couldn't manage the stairs much longer. April 15th, you both brought a realtor friend who happened to mention what the house might be worth. April 18th, first brochure for Sunset Gardens appeared, along with comments about the kitchen being so outdated. I looked up from my notes. Shall I continue? You've been documenting us? Addison's voice rose sharply. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to do. Packing? For what? Stephen demanded. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For my cruise, of course. The Mediterranean, 3 weeks. First-class cabin. It leaves the day after closing. For the first time in our relationship, Addison seemed completely at a loss for words. You can't do this. Addison's voice had lost its syrupy sweetness, replaced by something hard and brittle. You're clearly not thinking clearly. You're grieving, making rash decisions. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I replied, folding my hands calmly on the table. Grief has a way of cutting through the fog, showing what truly matters. Stephen looked shell-shocked, his face ashen. Mom, where will you live? I've purchased a lovely cottage in Oak Ridge, 2 bedrooms, all on 1 level, much more manageable. I took a sip of coffee. The security system is particularly impressive. The implication wasn't lost on Addison, whose nostrils flared. You're being ridiculous. We were only trying to help. By calling me the old lady? By planning to renovate my home while I'm tucked away in some facility? I shook my head. That's not help, Addison. That's exploitation. Stephen pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair in agitation. Mom, you're twisting everything. We were concerned about you being alone. Then you should have asked what I wanted. I cut in, my voice sharper now. Not made plans behind my back. Addison stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. I don't have to listen to this. You're being completely unreasonable. Sit down, Addison. To my surprise, it was Stephen who spoke. His voice strained but firm. Mom deserves an explanation. Addison gaped at him, unused to any resistance. After a moment's hesitation, she slowly lowered herself back into her chair, arms crossed defensively. I heard you, I said quietly, looking directly at my son. At the funeral. You both thought I couldn't hear, but I did. Every word. Stephen's eyes dropped to the table, unable to meet mine. I gave you every opportunity to be honest with me. Every time you mentioned Sunset Gardens, every time Addison criticized how difficult this house must be for me, I waited for you to show some shred of genuine concern. My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. But it was always about the house, never about me. That's not true, Stephen protested weakly. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked how I was really doing? When was the last time you sat with me and talked about your father, about the grief that's consuming me? Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. You've been here 8 times since the funeral. and not once did you ask about me. It was always about the house, about my living situation, about what would be best for me. Stephen's face crumpled slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him since Scott died. "We're family," he said, his voice hollow. "We're supposed to take care of each other. Family doesn't scheme. Family doesn't lie." I shook my head sadly. "Your father would be so disappointed." That struck home. Stephen flinched as if I'd slapped him. Scott had always been his hero, his moral compass. Knowing he'd failed that legacy seemed to finally penetrate. Addison, however, was unmoved. "This is absurd. You're punishing us because we tried to help. You plan your future." "No, Addison, I'm protecting myself from your help." I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "Now, I really do have packing to do." "You can't just throw us out," Addison sputtered. "Actually, I can. It's still my house, for the next 27 days at least." I moved toward the entryway, holding the front door open. "I'll let you know my new address when I'm settled. Or perhaps not." Stephen rose shakily, looking torn. "Mom, please." "I need time, Stephen. Time to decide if I can trust you again." My voice softened slightly. "Your father always said you had a good heart, but that you needed to find your own backbone. I hope he was right." They left, Stephen looking devastated, Addison seething, and I closed the door behind them with a quiet click. Only then did I allow myself to sink onto the entryway bench, hands trembling. I'd done it. After decades of being the peacemaker, the accommodating one, I'd finally stood up for myself. The relief was dizzying. The aftermath was swift and predictable. My phone began ringing within the hour. First Stephen, then Addison, then some of their friends, even my sister-in-law Nancy. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages ranged from apologetic, Stephen, to threatening, Addison, to confused, everyone else. Apparently, Addison was telling people I'd had some sort of breakdown, that I was making dangerous, irrational decisions in my grief. It might have worked if I hadn't been so methodical. Ted called that evening, chuckling. Addison showed up at my office this afternoon, he informed me, demanding to know if you were competent to sell the house. Despite everything, I laughed. "And what did you tell her?" "That you're one of the most competent people I know, grieving or not. And that if she continued to suggest otherwise, she might find herself facing a defamation suit." "Thank you, Ted." "My pleasure. How are you holding up?" I considered the question, surveying the living room where I'd begun sorting and packing. "I'm sad," I admitted. Not about the house, but about Stephen. I never realized how much Addison controlled him until now. "He's a grown man, Carolyn. He made his choices." "I know." I sighed. "Still, he's my son." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I hired professional packers, donated furniture I wouldn't need in my smaller cottage, and carefully sorted through the treasures and mementos of a lifetime. Margaret stopped by regularly, bringing lunch and helping me decide what to keep. A week after our confrontation, Stephen appeared alone on my doorstep. He looked awful, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothing rumpled. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He wandered into the half-packed living room, looking lost among the boxes. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, then turned to face me. "Addison and I had a huge fight. I've been staying at Dave's place." I didn't reply, waiting for him to continue. "You were right," he admitted finally. "About everything." I wasn't thinking about what you wanted. I let Addison convince me we knew better." He swallowed hard. "I've been a terrible son." "Not terrible," I said softly. "Just misguided." "Can you forgive me?" I studied my son's face, so like Scott's. yet lacking his inner strength. Forgiveness takes time, Stephen, and trust takes even longer to rebuild. He nodded, eyes downcast. I understand. I don't want to lose you too. For the first time since Scott's death, I saw my real son emerging from Addison's shadow. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. Your father once told me that the true test of a man isn't whether he makes mistakes, I said, but whether he has the courage to admit them and change. Stephen's eyes filled with tears. I miss him so much. So do I. I reached out, touching his arm lightly. Every single day. We stood in silence for a moment, united in grief, if nothing else. When do you leave for your cruise? He asked finally. 3 weeks from Tuesday. He nodded, looking around at the half-packed house. Need any help with all this? I considered for a moment, then nodded. I could use some help with your father's workshop. I've been avoiding it. I can do that, he said, a glimmer of the old Stephen showing through. Dad would want his tools to be used, not stored away. As he rolled up his sleeves and headed toward the garage, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. Addison, however, wasn't finished with me yet. The Mediterranean stretched before me, a vast expanse of blue that seemed to wash away the lingering shadows of the past weeks. Standing on the deck of the Royal Princess, I closed my eyes and let the sea breeze caress my face. For the first time since Scott's death, I felt something close to peace. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find Eleanor, a silver-haired woman. I'd met at dinner the previous night, joining me at the railing. Like me, she was traveling alone, a widow of 3 years who had finally decided to take the trip her husband had always promised her. It's more than I imagined, I admitted. Scott and I used to talk about this cruise for years, kept putting it off, thinking we had time. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's the cruelest trick of life, isn't it? The illusion of endless tomorrows. The first week of the cruise passed in a blur of port excursions, elegant dinners, and unexpected laughter. I found myself part of an informal group of solo travelers. Eleanor, a retired professor named Jack, a former nurse called Diane, and Richard, a soft-spoken widower with kind eyes. None of us were looking for romance, just companionship, and we fell into an easy rhythm of shared meals and shore explorations. On the 8th day, as we sailed toward Santorini, I finally checked my phone messages. The distance, both physical and emotional, had given me the strength to face whatever awaited. Stephen had called several times. His messages grew progressively more reflective, less defensive. I've been thinking about what you said, Mom, he said in the most recent one. About Dad being disappointed in me. You were right. I've let Addison make too many decisions, tried too hard to keep the peace at any cost. I'm seeing a counselor now, trying to figure out how I lost myself. That brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Perhaps there was hope for my son after all. Addison had left several messages too, each more venomous than the last. The final one made me pause. You think you're so clever, Carolyn, but you've destroyed this family. Stephen barely speaks to me anymore. I hope you're satisfied with your revenge. I deleted her messages without response. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. The night before we reached Santorini, I joined my new friends for dinner. The conversation flowed easily until Diane asked the question I'd been dreading. Will your family be meeting you when we return to the States? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. These people had become unexpected confidants, sharing their own family complications over glasses of wine and late-night conversations. No, I said. My son and I are complicated right now. My daughter-in-law tried to have me declared incompetent after I sold my house instead of letting her take it over. Their shocked expressions gave way to outrage as I recounted the full story. You did exactly the right thing, Jack said firmly. Too many seniors get bulldozed by family members who think they know better. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It takes courage to set boundaries, especially with your own child. That's what worries me, I admitted. I don't want to lose Stephen, but I can't go back to the way things were. Richard, who rarely spoke at length, cleared his throat. After my Sarah died, my daughter tried to move me into her basement. Said it was for my own good. His eyes met mine with quiet understanding. It took me a year to rebuild our relationship after I refused. But it was worth it. She respects me now, in a way she never did before. His words stayed with me as I watched the sunset from my balcony that evening. Perhaps that was what Stephen and I needed, a relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I was surprised to find myself looking forward to going home. Not to the house, that chapter was closed, but to my new cottage, my new beginning. The cruise had been everything Scott and I had dreamed, but it had also shown me something unexpected. I could create a life without him. Different, yes. Painful in its absences, certainly, but also full of possibility. The day before docking in Athens, I received an email from Margaret with photos of my cottage. The previous owners had left it immaculate, and the movers had arranged my furniture according to the floor plan we'd created. It looked welcoming, peaceful, a perfect sanctuary. Attached was a separate message. Thought you should know. Addison came by the office yesterday, asking about your new address. I told her client information was confidential. She didn't take it well. Just a heads up. I wasn't surprised. Addison had always struggled with boundaries, and losing control of the situation would be intolerable to her. I made a mental note to check that the security system was active before I moved in. Our last night at sea, the 5 of us gathered for a farewell dinner. We exchanged contact information and promises to meet again, perhaps for another cruise. I looked around the table at these people who had entered my life just weeks ago, yet felt like old friends. A toast, Jack proposed, raising his glass. To new beginnings. And to those who aren't here to share them, Eleanor added softly. But who would be proud of the journeys we're making without them? I thought of Scott, his laugh, his unwavering support, the way he'd always encouraged me to stand up for myself. To Scott, I whispered, joining the toast. My flight from Athens landed in the early afternoon. Despite my concerns, no one was waiting at the airport, neither Stephen nor Addison. I felt both relieved and oddly disappointed. Part of me had hoped Stephen might be there, a gesture of reconciliation. Margaret met me at the arrival gate, her familiar face a welcome sight. "Welcome home, traveler," she said, embracing me. "You look wonderful. Rested. The Mediterranean agreed with you." It did, I agreed as we collected my luggage. "But I'm ready to come home." "Stephen called me," Margaret said as we headed to her car. 3 times, actually. Wanted to know when you were returning. I raised an eyebrow. "And you told him?" "Only that you'd be back this week. I thought you should decide when to see him." She glanced at me. He sounded different. More like the Stephen I remember from before Addison. I nodded, processing this information. "And Addison?" Margaret's expression darkened slightly. "No further contact after that day in my office. But, she sighed. "There are rumors. Stephen's staying with his friend Dave permanently now." Apparently, there was quite a scene at their house. Neighbors called the police. I closed my eyes briefly. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in my son's marital troubles. "I'll call him tomorrow," I decided. "After I've settled in." The drive to Oak Ridge took us through tree-lined streets where early autumn was beginning to touch the leaves with gold. When we turned onto Willow Lane, I felt a flutter of anticipation. "There it is," Margaret said, pulling into the driveway of a charming cottage with a small front garden. "Home sweet home." I stepped out of the car, taking in the details. The blue shutters, the stone pathway, the rose bushes along the front. It wasn't the home Scott and I had shared, but it felt right somehow. A place to honor the past while embracing whatever came next. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Inside, everything was just as the photos had shown. My favorite reading chair sat in the sunroom surrounded by my plants. Scott's desk, smaller than the one in his study but still carrying his essence, occupied a corner of the living room. Our wedding photo held pride of place on the mantel. As Margaret helped me unpack my suitcase, I felt a growing certainty that I'd made the right choice. This space was mine, manageable, comfortable, free from painful memories and machinations. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months, lulled by the unfamiliar creaks and settling sounds of my new home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, reconnecting with Stephen, establishing new routines, finding my place in this neighborhood. But for now, I was exactly where I needed to be. 1 year after Scott's death, I stood in my sunroom, watering the orchids that had become my quiet passion. Through the windows, I could see my small garden coming alive with spring blooms. Daffodils pushing through the soil, the rose bushes budding with promise. Some were cuttings from Scott's garden, transplanted to this new soil, thriving in their second life. The doorbell rang, and I smiled. Right on time. "Coming," I called, setting down my watering can. Stephen stood on the porch, holding a small gift bag. The past year had changed him. His posture straighter, his eyes clearer, his smile more genuine. The shadows of Addison's influence had receded, revealing the son I'd always known was there. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, embracing me. "Thank you, sweetheart." I ushered him inside. "You're the first to arrive. Margaret and the others should be here soon." He followed me to the kitchen, where a cake waited on the counter. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, Scott's favorite recipe that I'd finally mastered after decades of trying. Some traditions were worth keeping. "How's the new apartment?" I asked, pouring coffee for both of us. "Good. Small, but it's close to work." He shrugged. "The divorce will be final next month?" I nodded, still saddened by the collapse of his marriage, but relieved by his escape from Addison's manipulation. The separation had been ugly. Accusations, threats, even a restraining order after she'd shown up at his workplace causing a scene. But Stephen had remained firm, supported by the counselor he still saw weekly. "And the job?" I prompted. His face brightened. "Great, actually. They're considering me for the project manager position." I smiled, genuinely proud. After years of drifting from one half-hearted career to another under Addison's direction, Stephen had returned to his first love, architectural restoration. The confidence suited him. "Dad would be proud," I said softly. Stephen's eyes misted slightly. "I think about that a lot, what he'd think of the changes I've made. He always believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself." He nodded, then reached for the gift bag. "This is for you. It's not much, but..." Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with an inlaid pattern of birds in flight. "Stephen, it's beautiful. I made it," he admitted, a hint of pride in his voice. "In that woodworking class I told you about, Dad's tools helped me practice." I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, touched beyond words. Scott had been trying to interest Stephen in woodworking for years, but Addison had always dismissed it as a waste of time. "It's perfect," I said. "Thank you." The doorbell rang again, and soon the cottage filled with voices and laughter as my new circle of friends arrived. Margaret, Eleanor, and Jack from the cruise, who had indeed reconnected, eventually as more than friends, neighbors from Willow, Lane, and members of my book club. As we gathered around the dining table, I looked at the faces surrounding me, some new, some old, all cherished. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this scene. I'd been defined by loss, of Scott, of the home we'd shared, of the relationship I thought I had with my son. Now, Though a day never passed without missing Scott, I had built something new from the ashes of that grief. Not a replacement, but a continuation. A life still worth living. After cake and presents, as conversations broke into smaller groups, Stephen pulled me aside. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his expression serious. "Addison contacted me yesterday." My stomach tightened. "What did she want?" "To apologize, supposedly." He shook his head in disbelief. "She said she's been doing reflection work and realizes how controlling she was." "Do you believe her?" "Not for a second." His voice was firm. "But that's not the concerning part. She asked about you, specifically about your address. Said she wanted to make amends." A chill ran through me, despite the warm spring day. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. But Mom, she mentioned details about your cottage, the blue shutters, the roses. I think she already knows where you live." I nodded slowly, not entirely surprised. Addison's determination had always been her most consistent quality. "Thank you for telling me. I'll be careful." Stephen's brow furrowed with worry. "Maybe I should stay here for a few days." "No," I interrupted gently. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm perfectly capable of handling Addison." "Mom, I have a security system, nosy neighbors who watch everything, and Margaret on speed dial." I squeezed his hand. "Trust me, Stephen. I'm not afraid of her anymore." He studied my face, then nodded reluctantly. "Just call me if anything happens. Anything at all. I promise." The party continued into early evening, filling my cottage with the kind of warmth and laughter that heals. When the last guest departed, Stephen helped me clean up, then hesitated at the door. "You're sure you'll be okay?" I smiled, touched by his concern. "Absolutely sure. Now go. You have that big presentation tomorrow." After he left, I moved through the cottage, turning off lights and locking windows. In the sunroom, I paused to admire the orchids Scott had never managed to keep alive. "Look at that," I whispered to his memory. "I finally got the knack of it." The next morning dawned clear and bright. I was enjoying coffee in my garden when the crunch of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Looking up, I felt a jolt of recognition as Addison's sleek car pulled into my driveway. Some things never change, I thought, setting down my cup and straightening my shoulders. She emerged from the car looking thinner than I remembered, her usually perfect appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Divorce hadn't been kind to her. "Carolyn," she called, approaching with forced brightness. "What a lovely place you have here." I remained seated, not bothering to rise. "Addison, this is unexpected." She hesitated at the edge of the garden, clearly thrown by my lack of welcome. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her rehearsed speech already sounding hollow. "About how things ended between us. I wanted to apologize." "Did you?" I kept my voice neutral. "Or did you want something else?" Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I gestured to the chair across from me. "But sit. Say what you came to say." She sat gingerly, eyes darting around the garden as if assessing its value. "Stephen and I are getting divorced. I'm aware. It's been difficult, financially." She twisted her hands in her lap. "The house is being foreclosed on. I thought, given your own experience almost losing your home, you might understand." I held up a hand, stopping her. "Let me save us both some time, Addison. You're not here to apologize. You're here because you need money, and you think I might be guilted or manipulated into providing it." Her face hardened, the pretense of contrition evaporating. "You destroyed my marriage. You owe me," I laughed, genuinely amused by her audacity. "I owe you nothing. You plotted to put me in a home and take my house. You called me the old lady at my husband's funeral. You tried to have me declared incompetent when I outsmarted you. I never. Stop lying, Addison. It's exhausting for Ba. Both of us. For a moment, raw fury flashed across her face. The real Addison, stripped of pretense. Then she composed herself, leaning forward with calculated intensity. Fine. I need help, Carolyn. I'm not too proud to ask, but you are too proud to earn it honestly. I shook my head. The answer is no. She stared at me, seemingly unable to process this final rejection. You cold-hearted bitch, she whispered. You think you've won, don't you? I looked around my peaceful garden, thought of my cozy cottage, the friends who'd celebrated with me yesterday, the son who was finding his way back to himself, thought of Scott, who would have been so proud of the strength I'd found. This was never about winning, Addison. I rose, signaling the end of our conversation. It was about surviving, something I've become quite good at. This isn't over, she hissed, standing as well. Actually, it is. I met her gaze steadily. Goodbye, Addison. I wish you well, truly, but our paths end here. I watched her drive away, tires spitting gravel in her fury. Perhaps once, such a confrontation would have left me shaking, second-guessing myself. But not anymore. Inside, I called Stephen. Addison paid me a visit, I said when he answered. I thought you should know. I'm coming over, he said immediately. There's no need. She's gone, and she won't be back. How can you be sure? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Because I'm not the woman she thought I was. I'm not the woman I thought I was either. After we hung up, I returned to the garden, to the roses Scott and I had tended together for decades. They were smaller here, still establishing themselves in new soil, but they were thriving, adapting, growing stronger each day. Like me. Tea? Afternoon sun warmed my face as I closed my eyes, feeling Scott's presence in the gentle breeze. We did it, I whispered. We got through the worst of it. And somewhere, in the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds, I could almost hear his answer, I never doubted you for a moment, Carolyn. Not for a single moment. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.